All right. Well, thank you for coming along, everybody. So we've got 24 still climbing participants today. I'm really excited about this month's ESIP never remember the actual acronym, the ESIP Information Technology and Interoperability um, Rants and Raves seminar series. This month we have Carlos Scheidegger. Is that
That's
okay?
right.
All
I should have
right.
helped you ahead of time. No, that's actually really good. Thank you.
Carlos is a software engineer at Posit, formerly, I guess some people would know them as RStudio, who works on the Quarto project. I have been following this one since the first rumors of it and used it quite a bit, and I'm super keen, and I'm really excited to hear Carlos's rant and or rave about the topic. If you don't follow Carlos on social media, he's tailor-made for the rants and raves.
No,
Um,
no. You're probably better off staying that way. That's what I'll
he's,
say.
I'm excited for, and I jokingly said to somebody, this is going to be a spicy one. It's going to be fun. I'm excited. So, Carlos, I'll let you introduce yourself further and just go ahead and take it away. If you leave as much time as you want for question and answer, we've got about an hour total. So
All right. I think I
take us
have
away.
like 30 minutes and we'll have plenty of questions, but we can go
Cool.
longer. So thanks, Dave. Thanks. This is a great fun and great pleasure. And I I hesitate to agree with you that this is probably right my alley in terms of a topic that I think is actually a really interesting way to think about why we end up having or choosing to use software versus not is I think that like the things that make us excited and the things that makes us want to sort of throw everything in the garbage are good pointers for how to design and how to sort of not to choose not to use software. So I'm also very excited about this. So I'm a software engineer at Posit, like they've said. You might have heard from us before as RStudio. Last sort of couple of years, the company has rebranded itself as Posit, and Quarto is a natural outspring of sort of this idea that data science is bigger than R, and we are, I think, deservedly, and I do think we are sort of world class designers of like our ecosystem data science packages. So this includes RStudio, it includes Tidyverse, and I'm going to get into this a little bit if you haven't heard of it. Um, but the company sort of leadership and like software engineers, sort of everyone kind of agrees that like the data science world is bigger than this, and we should be embracing this. And so we rebranded. We still build our studio, we still build our tools, but we are looking at wider sort of range of products. And I've been working on Quarto, which is the thing I'm going to tell you about, since I joined Posit, which was just over 2 years ago. Before that, I was a computer science professor, so I'm a recovering academic. I see a number of folks here are faculty professors. I recognize some of your names, and I'm should sort of be a little more specific about what I mean by recovering. I have a deep amount of respect for folks who make it in the sort of modern academic environment, and I just realized it sort of wasn't for me. So about a year into the pandemic, I started at RStudio as an academic leave, and then I realized that this is actually what I wanted to do. So I'm happy to talk more about that, but let's get to the talk. So just a few mechanics and ground rules for how I'm going to give this talk. One of the themes that will be mostly sort of an unavoidable rant is that Quarto is pretty big. And a consequence of that is that I really will not have time to go into everything that I think is useful or necessary. And this goes double for sort of a diverse audience like this one, where, I can see that there's folks who are going to be looking at this and sort of very different entry points into Quarto as a system, into Quarto as like an ecosystem, as a tool. And so what I've chosen to do is sort of provide as many links as I can, and I hope to sort of add more either to the chat or sort of like as I'm navigating this, we'll have web pages. So I highly encourage you to follow along this presentation by starting with this link right here. So this should take you to this very presentation on any web browser, and it should work. I've tested it on desktop, but this should work equally well on mobile. And so there's the link on chat that someone asked. You'll see that my notes had a, don't forget to drop the link on Zoom chat. Thank you for reminding me. And my hope here is to give you an overview and sort of what I think is great and not about this. I will say the 38 slides there are more, that number is bigger than what I have. And so if, this talk will probably go a little shorter, and if folks are sort of interested in like taking this into sort of a tangent that you think would be useful for the audience, I am not super familiar with you all, but I can improvise pretty decently at giving a talk of what I think you might be interested in. So do not hesitate to stop and ask questions. Raise your hand on Zoom. I will ask either Mike or Dave to sort of keep an eye on chat. I have you all on my corner here, but I'm not quite sure I'll be able to catch everything. So yeah, let's just mostly play it by ear and what I think you'll be interested in. But if this turns out to not be what you were expecting, do let me know and we can sort of audible into something else. Because they've already sort of mentioned, I'm a person that probably has more opinions than time. And this is like, goes double for a talk like this. And so let me just say it explicitly that unless I say otherwise, what you're hearing me here is a professional but personal opinion. So think of it as like representing me as someone who wants to write good open source software for a living that serves an audience like yours more than it does something from Posit. With that said, a lot of what I believe, I do think that Posit acts and believes on as well. But I am not going to say that it is an official Posit stance for most of the things that I will tell you about here. And when it is, I will tell you as much. So I don't know if folks are sci-fi fans in the audience. I am. And let me start by giving you sort of a little bit of personal perspective. I don't know if you've read this series of novels from William Gibson that starts with pattern recognition. It's one of his mid-2000s novel, and Case Pollard is the protagonist. It's actually not the best sort of set of Gibson novels from this time. I think that his latest Peripheral is absolutely brilliant. And if you're going to take like a sci-fi pick for you to add to your to-do list, that should be the one. But the protagonist in pattern recognition sort of is, she is like physically allergic to bad logos. And great, I am missing an image here. This is unfortunate, but the image that I'm missing is the Michelin logo. And so Case Pollard is physically allergic to bad logos. That's like an actual plot point on this. She will have like actual physical reactions to seeing something that is a bad logo, and she can't actually deal with it. It's too much physically, which of course is a bit of a plot device. Oh, and now I closed my window by accident. This is going swimmingly. I apologize. Let's go back to the talk that we had here and reshare my screen. All right. I apologize for that. Let's go back to the slide that is missing an image. I hope the other ones aren't missing as well. Case Pollard is allergic to bad logos. And what does this have to do with our talk today? Well, I'm physically allergic to bad software. Like, it hurts to have to use bad software. Like, I don't know how else to say it. And I guess if you've seen me online and like complain about things, I can't help myself. And there's plenty of bad software that is out there today. I'm not going to tell you mostly what I think is bad software. One, because I think that sort of I want to tell you about Quarto and where Quarto is both good and bad software. And honestly, we don't have enough time in this talk for this, or, in the 2020s. There's plenty of it out there. So yeah, somehow all of the images are gone, and this is really unfortunate. So this was the background of Mitch Hedberg, who's a comic who, you know what, you all have the link to this. I'm going to switch to a different I apologize for this. This was unexpected. I actually did test it, and I made a late change that probably broke the path. So we will do this live. So I'm actually running Quarto right now to re-render this talk locally. And now we're running it on my screen. Here's the Michelin logo, so I think we are okay. So with apologies to Mitch Hedberg, as an academic, I used to hate software, and well, I still do, but I used to as well. Software is terrible. Software is the kind of thing that I think we're forced to live with to do the kind of work that we have to do. But I think very, very few of us, especially in an audience like this, would think that sort of, software is the reason we are in this. We are in this to do science. We're in this to change the world. We're in this to be sort of intellectually stimulated. We're in this to sort of, connect to people who are interested in the same things. We are not in this for software. I write software, it's my job, but I confess to you, I really, really, really hate it. And I think that makes me a good software developer, honestly. I think that lets me tell you where Quarto is great and where it's not great. And it really isn't perfect. And I know because I work on it. I've seen both the inside and the outside. And there's a lot of it that I think is really interesting, and there's a lot of it to like, but it's not perfect, and I will tell you about it. So I do think that we go further into making a good authoring experience for technical documents than most of the software I use. And that's what I'm excited to tell you about. So just as a little bit more of our mechanics, if things are good, they're going to look like this. If things are bad, they're going to look like this, like YAML, which we're going to have to deal with. And if you've had to use before, you know exactly why it's in this slide. So I'm not here to sell you Quarto. Really, I'm not. It's open source. It's part of our pro offerings, but that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to tell you what I think is interesting about it and hope that you will like what we're doing with it. And I'm also not here to convince you that the Python data science world is better or worse than the R data science world is better or worse. I think this is a consequence of the world that we live in, and we need to do the best we can with what we are given. So, and I think Quarto is actually very actively trying to do that. So there's some cool stuff that I can tell you about, and I will, but I'm not going to turn this into a horse race of the tidyverse is better, or pandas is better, or I like one library versus another. I'm happy to tell you about things on neither one of those, but that's not what this talk is. So where are we today in terms of like having to do like data science on computers and share it with the world, right? I think broadly speaking, there is two worlds that are sort of responsible for a good chunk of what happens. All right, so if you do tabular data analysis, if you do statistical analysis mostly, you will certainly have heard of R. You will probably have used it before, and maybe this is your primary tool. And so, tidyverse is what folks call this. This is sort of like this R-centric set of libraries and tools and development environments that are pretty well designed to work well together. And in terms of authoring experience, if you've used this, you've heard of rmarkdown, which is this way of sort of mixing R and prose to make documents, right? And so there's rmarkdown, bookdown, blockdown, all of this. A markdown document, right? Something that looks like, let's go look at the source for this talk, because this is a markdown document, right? So something that looks more or less like this, right? So bullet points that look more or less like plain text, right? So the source of truth looks something like this with interspersed code in it, right? So this talk doesn't have code, so you're not going to see things that will say R in here, things of that sort. But one document that describes both the narrative and the prose in terms of like a lab notebook or in terms of a paper and the code itself, right? So a plain text document is the source of truth for your analyses, right? And so this is kind of central to the R Markdown tidyverse perspective. And what it does mean is that when you're ready to execute it, it by and large means that we're going to take that entire document and run it from top to bottom, from beginning to the end. I think this is a very, very good default for computational science. It is good because the semantics and the order of execution is sort of driven by the document, is driven by how you tend to read, and it's sort of driven, it makes it hard for you to accidentally introduce state that will actually sort of influence the output of the document. And so in terms of reproducibility, I think this is a very simple default. It's almost the simplest you can imagine, but it's very good because it's the simplest you can imagine. And science in computational replicability is already very hard to begin with. So it does mean that if you have workflows that are run, for example, on a supercomputer somewhere and you have to take the outputs from, or if they're executed in the cloud on Google Colab, if you're doing things with big GPUs and machine learning, it doesn't work so well, right? So this is a really sort of significant shortcoming of the rmarkdown ecosystem is, it's sort of hard to make it work when you're running things interactively, because just running the model will take very long time. And so this is certainly a problem with that. Contrast that with the Jupyter ecosystem. So if you've used Jupyter notebooks, IPython notebooks from, if you remember that far back, the ecosystem has the same kinds of tools. It has Jupyter Book, it has Mist Markdown, it has actual Jupyter notebooks. And in terms of code, this tends to be by and large Python centric. That's where it started. IPython was where things started on that side. So this was sort of folks like Brian Granger, back 15 years ago or so. And here the libraries you've heard before, Matplotlib, Altair, Pandas, they all work pretty nicely together. I think they are less well designed together than the tidyverse. I think that's just a fact of life because they were designed by different people in different organizations instead of sort of one company with an open source team that was trying to make everything play nicely together. So I think this is a little less tightly put together than the tidyverse, but there's a lot more you can do with it because Python is a much bigger world than R. And to me, the sort of central way to think about the Jupyter ecosystem is that a notebook is the source of truth. And a notebook in Jupyter is not only the inputs, but it's also the outputs that were generated. So if you're inside Jupyter, if you're inside something like that, you run your code, you have the cells, you get the outputs, and when you hit save, you not only save the prose and the code, but you actually save the output with it. And so naturally it stores execution output in a structured format, which is really nice if you need to take your output and move it from one computer to the next, like you have to do if you're running things on a supercomputer, if you're running things on the cloud. So that's good. That's, I think, a really smart insight for folks that have this kind of heterogeneous setup. On the other hand, it's really easy to get yourself into a state that you don't know how you actually end up with a cell output because they end up sort of implicitly depend on the state of things that have been executed before. And although you can execute a Jupyter notebook from top to bottom, and it's good practice to do so, in general, the actual practiced output is not to do that, is to go interactively into the notebook, run a few cells, maybe rerun some of the other ones until you get the result that didn't crash or that did what you want, and then you save your notebook. And so now in terms of reproducibility, this is a really bad problem, right? So you're now stuck with this. But it's actually how folks practice data science in the Jupyter ecosystem. So what do we do? Well, in comes Quarto. So what really is Quarto? And here I'm going to give you sort of a number of ways to think about it. If you go to our website, so this is quarto.org, this is what we call it. We call it an open source scientific and technical publishing system. So if you need to create scientific and technical publications, this is a collection of software that will let you do that. That's a beautiful sentence that describes it, the vision and the goal. It doesn't tell you what it does, right? There's another way of doing this. If you are a manager or if you're a team lead for a team that is sort of very diverse in terms of how it works, you can think of Quarto as a compatibility layer for the two largest data science ecosystems. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Why do we have a copy of those? That's not supposed to be there. And I think those are very good things to think about. right? I think they are actually like really smart and really important things to exist in the world. It is also a rewrite of rmarkdown with multi-language as a first-class concern. So from the get-go, if you like look at how we think and how we present Quarto, it's going to feel a lot more familiar to you if you come from rmarkdown than if you come from the Jupyter world. That's a consequence of the folks who wrote it, who are former RStudio Now Posit employees. I don't think that's good or bad, but I think it's a thing you should be sort of aware of, that your experience will be easier if you come from like rmarkdown rather than if you come from Jupyter. It is also a set of good default styles for technical websites or books. So if all you want to do is be able to focus on the things you want to write, a blog, a website, a paper, Quarto will give you that, independently of whether you care about the interoperability between these systems and sort of like the larger goals. Quarto offers, which I think are really sort of good looking set of things. And Dave is telling on chat that people come from Jupyter just find out how awesome rmarkdown always was. I tend to agree, but we'll get to some of the points where I actually think that they're really smart things the way that Jupyter is set up. But by and large, I think, and again, you would expect me to say that because that's where I come from, that rmarkdown has, I think, better defaults than a lot of the Jupyter world. But folks who work on Jupyter are definitely going to find that strange. They're going to sort of think of it that they're like, in some weird foreign world that, sort of you're driving on the right side of the road. It's that kind of thing, right? Now, Quarto lets you, for example, get both an accessible web page and a publication-ready PDF from the same source. Why is this in a rant? Well, it's in a rant because I wish we lived in a world where PDF didn't have to exist. I think PDF at this point is a legacy format that is completely unnecessary, and we are here because of path dependence. So a lot of the ugly parts of Quarto come from having to support legacy formats, and PDF is not the only one of them. But we have to do that. And so if you have to do something that requires you to get a publication-ready PDF, but you would like to have an accessible web page, Quarto will do that. That's a great thing. But it's kind of garbage that we have to deal with PDF to begin with. And like I'm speaking here as a former academic, and I remember having to sort of fight journals for stupid formatting issues that should be completely irrelevant in our year of the Lord 2023. But here we are, and we can't really do much about it. And so Quarto puts a lot of work into sort of being able to do these things, but they're hard. They don't work 100%. And I think what we do is better than what's out there, but it's really not great. And in terms of mechanics, Quarto is just sort of scare quotes around just a really big wrapper around Pandoc. Pandoc is a fantastic piece of software that allows you to convert from multiple input formats to multiple output formats, but it's gigantic. It's got literal thousands of options that can control it. And you can't really, there's no really good entry point. It's a really advanced piece of software. It's exceedingly powerful, but it's really, really hard to get into. So Quarto is an attempt to sort of make Pandoc be a little bit more round around the edges. And I think it's great that we are partially successful at it, but we are partially successful at it. And so if we want to sort of complain about Pandoc idiosyncrasies, we have 30 more minutes to do so because they definitely deserve it. It's sort of a consequence of how we needed to do the work, but it's not fantastic. Pandoc is a brilliant piece of software, and it's just that it's then very big. And so, there's so much in Quarto. I just gave you 7 different ways to think about how Quarto goes. This is also something about it that I think sucks. I think it's not great. And I think it has a real impact in how our documentation exists. So I think our documentation is very good. I think it's probably best in class for this kind of software, but I think it falls short to what I expect good documentation to be, even though this is actually best in class. And part of it is because we are trying to serve such a diverse audience with so many entry points that it's almost like there's 7, 6 different kinds of Quarto systems that people can use that need different documentation. And we're not there yet. Let me just be perfectly honest. Our documentation is very good in terms of reference. It's got a few very good entry points, but it's nowhere near as good as it should be. So I want to acknowledge it is frustrating. We are working on it. We have literal, actual employees working entirely on Quarto documentation at Posit. So we are committed to making this better. And here is, to me, the central slide for this talk, and the central slide for why I think Quarto is interesting. And so here's 2 really gnarly consequences of having to design systems that are used by people and having to design systems that exist to make other systems easier. So the first one is Conway's law. So Conway was a software engineer and a manager, and this is a brilliant observation that I think goes further than software. But the short way to say what Conway said is that companies ship their org charts. So companies will design products whose design will necessarily be a copy of their own internal communication structure. This is simply because the boundaries that exist in software exist because there's a boundary in a communication, right? If the entire company was just one gigantic mind that could keep the entirety of the software at once, then the structure would be sort of all of it, and there would not have to be sort of any real abstraction boundaries, any real sort of places where things are collected, because it was all one big mind. So if you think of it, the existence of these abstraction boundaries, the existence of these different pieces that exist to serve different needs in a company, they exist simply because a company is organized in a particular way. And this is both obvious, but also very deep and has consequences for sort of everywhere you can imagine. And in terms of data science work, if you think of, a large government organization and a large sort of company even that has, perhaps 20 to 50 data scientists, we know these companies exist, and a fraction of them were trained on tidyverse and a fraction of them were trained on Python because of the research group that they were brought up with or things of that sort. What will happen is that you will have these 2 completely disconnected worlds. The people in Python will talk to the people in Python, the people in R will talk to the people in R, but the company exists to solve a particular problem that is independent of R and Python. So how do you get those 2 to actually work well together? That's kind of why we were making Quarto exist the way that it does, because we believe that it's only by getting those people to naturally talk to one another and collaborate that you're actually going to sort of reduce this sort of accidental path dependence of the world, right? So this is one of the things that actually keeps me up at night, is how can we reduce the friction between navigating these different worlds. The other one is, and I heard this from Alan Kay when he was visiting our school when I was in grad school. I don't know who this is attributed to, but I think it's a really, really deep insight as well. And he said something like, good tools do not make moderately hard things easy at the expense of making hard things impossible. You can create a tool that takes medium hard tasks and make them very easy. If in the process you've made a hard thing impossible, all that's going to happen is you're going to get all your users excited and into your system by solving the medium hard problems. And when they actually then are invested in your system and like it, and they need to actually do something really hard with it, they learn that it's impossible. And that's a horrible thing to do. It's an effective way to create a captive user base that is now stuck with your system for life. But if you're actually trying to create a good system, you don't want to do that. You do not want to make very hard things impossible, but you do want to make the moderately hard things easier. And this is a really hard balance. But I think that in effect, what it means is that sort of good software has escape hatches, and we're going to get into that, right? So good software has tools to make hard things easier. And it also has ways to sort of make the very hard things not harder than they used to be. So let me tell you what I mean by that in the context of Quarto, right? So Quarto, from the start, has decided that we are going to let you give inputs in both Markdown, which is kind of like the rmarkdown world, or actual factual IPyNB files. Okay, so if you are working with someone that produces Jupyter notebooks as their output, like actual IPyNB files, you can go and tell Quarto to make a website that is built entirely out of IPyNB files as input. We will take the markdown that exists there, we'll take the outputs that were generated in there, and we'll convert them to an HTML that is formatted like anything else you would get, including other files that came from, for example, Markdown. So notably, what we have is that you can use QMD files and IPyNB files as inputs, and you can also make Quarto emit those as output. So we will generate HTML, we will generate docx, but we will also generate Markdown as output and IPyNB as output. So if you want to use Quarto to decorate your files in some way and then give them back as IPyNB files because you want to use them in the rest of your ecosystem, we allow that to do so, exactly because we want to sort of reduce this like bicameral mind of like, sort of like half the world speaks IPython and half the world speaks rmarkdown. A part that's not so great is that there's a lot more than just QMD and IPyNB in a data science world, and we can't really avoid it. Sometimes, even at the very basics, you're going to have to know Markdown and Jupyter, but you're going to have to know Python, R, or Julia, and their associated libraries to actually write your code, right, to do the work that you want to do. If you want to configure things like title, subtitle, right, so I've already showed this on a talk, right, but, if you want to actually say, okay, how do I control the slide numbers for review? How do I put something in the footer? How do I specify what are my styles? You need to know how to write YAML. And YAML is not great. You also need to know CSS if you want to do HTML styles. You need to know JavaScript if you want to do interactivity. You need to know Lua if you want to do pandoc extensions. You need to know LaTeX if you're submitting to a journal that requires PDF. You need to know pandoc templates if you want to do extensions, right? And so inevitably, we are trying to create an abstraction on top of a very diverse world. And so when this leaks, it requires you to learn a lot of things. And that's kind of gross. I think it's unavoidable, but it's kind of gross. If you're willing to do that, though, you do get a lot of really interesting results out of this. You can make your inputs in either Markdown or in IPyNB, and your outputs can become papers. They can be presentations like this one. They can be web pages, so they can actually just be a web page that has the entire content of your paper from the same source. They can be entire books. They can be book chapters. You can be entire websites. You can build a weblog next to your technical website with your papers. And all of that sort of takes from inputs either QMD or PyNB, which is nice. You can produce PDF. You can produce PDF via LaTeX, which is how academics have been doing it more or less for a long time. Some places will actually accept doc, like Microsoft Word as input. The good news is you can emit docx as well. pandoc recently added support for typist, and I saw, I think it was Mike that mentioned typist. Here, typist is meant to be like a replacement for LaTeX. It's started only a couple of years ago, but it sort of is gone really far, really fast. And so it's really exciting to watch out. The support here is sort of pretty, I would say, bleeding edge. So you should expect it to be not great. It just was added to pandoc like a couple of months ago, but it's really fast. It's really interesting, and it sort of has a good future story for a collaboration of multiple authors and things of that sort. So if you're interested in this, I highly recommend you take a look at Typist, sort of to see where maybe, hopefully, we'll be in 10 years once we realize that like we've outlived LaTeX. Other outputs that might be of interest here for these folks. So if you've submitted to some journals, I think that the AGU is now considering taking inputs from JATS. JATS is a journal article tag suite, is a sort of standard for metadata and how you submit formats, submit papers. So we can take QMD and IPyNB as inputs, and we can produce a JATS compatible output, which is something you should be able to send to a publisher, and they will then convert it to whatever they need, sort of in a standardized way. And there's then an additional thing built on top of it that's called Mecha, which is manuscript. I won't remember what it is, but it essentially allows you to do what they mean by portable documents. So you don't have to, if you're submitting something to like, Nature, Lancet, Science, like sort of like all of the big journals, you have only one document that you sort of put somewhere, and then you can tell people, hey, consider this for Science, consider this for Nature, or you can just submit them with no changes at all from one to the other. So like publishers are promising to read this from like a single source of truth, which is, if you're an academic and have had to deal with changing sort of templates and changing requirements in terms of metadata and things of that sort, is actually really exciting. And again, as an escape hatch, you can write your own custom output. It's a lot of work, but you can. How do you author files? RStudio is sort of like built by Posit, so it has really good Quarto support. Includes a visual editor. If you don't want to learn Markdown, you can actually like highlight things and like make them bold or not. It works pretty good. I don't use RStudio. It's a weird confession. I actually use VS Code, and it has an excellent Quarto mode. I do think that we are making a lot of effort into making these things go beyond the kind of ecosystem that we built in the company. It also supports any text editor, and sort of by any, I mean things that are sufficiently extensible. I know of an Emacs mode and a NeoVim mode if you're sort of old school. I wrote the Emacs mode. I used to be an Emacs user, and then I got convinced that VS Code was actually better, which if you've heard any Emacs user say that should shock you. I used Emacs for like actual 20 years of my life. And nowadays I switched to VS Code as a daily driver. So I think it's actually quite solid. Here is, I think, where we get to the important stuff for this talk. You can make one website in which half the people use Jupyter and half the people use rmarkdown. They use knitr. Each document is only allowed to have one of those. So for every one QMD file or every IPyNB file, you have to decide whether it will be like eventually rendered through Jupyter or through knitr. Like you have to decide on that ahead of time. And it's a little weird in that both Jupyter and knitr support both Python and R. Jupyter really started in Python. knitr really started with R. But both communities realized that eventually they needed to talk to the other one, right? So they added their own sort of not great support for the other languages. So in Jupyter, you can run an R kernel. In knitr, you can run a Python code evaluator. But in Quarto, you can actually use the native engine for those. And you can do things like in a single textbook, if you have one chapter that's dealing with like a geospatial model that exists better in Python, and then if you have another chapter that's doing like some fancy Bayesian analysis that you really want to use Stan, and you want to use the sort of R Stan rather than PyStan because that's what you know, you write one chapter with one, the other chapter with the other, and Quarto knows how to dispatch these and then combine the results kind of automatically. If you have something where like you're editing a book and there's multiple collaborators, some of them does something in R, the other one does something in Python, this all just works. That's kind of nice. It reduces a lot of the friction that comes in that. So question, can Quarto docs use child documents, and can those children use the different engine? So child documents is this idea where you can include a bit of another document. And unfortunately, the answer to that is Quarto can use child documents. So we have a feature for that, both in IPyNBs and in QMDs, but the eventual execution has to happen in a single engine. However, I will show you one way in which this, that is recent, and it's actually, I think, really cool, and it lets you sort of sidestep this. And that's right here. So this was a great question. Thank you. One of the things that we added very recently, this was about 4 months ago, is that you can use Jupyter Notebook parts as an input. So the idea is if you're writing a document, either a QMD file or an IPyNB file, and you want to refer to a content of a different file, you can use what we're calling notebook embeds. And so this is worth just sort of taking a look at it. So if you're writing your notebook and you sort of generate an output that you really like, you have it here sort of within Jupyter Lab, you have a Jupyter notebook that builds this figure that you like. So someone sends you an IPyNB file that has all of the computed outputs in the format that you like, because they were run on the cloud, or because they ran it on their computer that has data that you don't have access to, for example. They gave you an IPyNB file. In Quarto, you can actually refer to a cell of those directly. You just take the IPyNB and you use this sort of strange syntax So this is a short code. Think of it as like a function call. And we have a function called embed. And then you can just give the name of the PyNB file and then the name of the cell, because you can tag things with names on Jupyter Lab. And then this will put this output inside the actual notebook. And if you're doing this on a website, it will actually automatically synthesize your reference, right? So you see here, there's a reference to, Palmer penguins here as the notebook that generated it. And so this notebook is also nicely generated entirely into HTML. So if you're thinking of something like supplemental materials, or if you're thinking of something like reproducibility, where it's like, okay, I can see this image, but how did they get there? We automatically synthesize you a page that contains the entirety of the notebook. You can disable this but by default we do it, which I think is actually kind of nice, because you get the ability to just put these things on your PDF files, and on your website you actually get an automatic reference into the original document. So this means that computation can be performed anywhere you want. You can refer them directly in any of the Quarto workflows, and you can reuse them, right? So you can actually go and regenerate those files, and then just re-render your page. So I just told you that it sucks that Jupyter notebooks get executed out of band because they can get stale, and this is bad for reproducibility. So now we just reintroduced this problem, and it's true, we did. Unfortunately, there isn't much we can do about this, because this fundamental problem of what gets executed where is much bigger than Quarto, and we're just kind of living with this badness right now. And to me, this reminds me of a quote from Carl Sagan from Cosmos, which is like, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. I don't know if you remember that. Maybe most folks here are not have not seen Cosmos, but if you have, you remember that scene. And it reminds me of this because in Quarto, we actually don't get to reinvent the universe. We're trying to meet people where they are in the ecosystems that exist. And in order to use them, we have to inherit some of the bad parts about it. That's kind of like not great. I think it's a problem, but that's where we are. So that's authoring. What if you want to publish something, right? So this is where I think it's another really nice feature for Quarto, is from the same command line, where if you say Quarto render, or if you're on RStudio IDE and you say render, there's a button right next to it that says publish. And what that button does is that it will actually take your output, it will render it, and it will send it to a publishing service where all you have to do is register once, and your thing will be available and visible for anyone who might want to see it. So you don't have to learn how to deal with, I don't know what's your favorite Amazon Web Services, or like, your internal university publishing system or something like that. If all you want to do is put something on a publishing provider, we will do a one button publish for you and give you a nice URL and sort of just have it accessible. Quarto.pub is something that we built and we ship, so it works entirely independently of wherever you want to do. But this also works with our pro products in case you're at a university that has Connect. Or if you have something on GitHub, we will publish to GitHub pages. We also publish through Confluence and Amplify. And like I said, we are working on Mecca, which is the Manuscript Exchange Common Approach. We just merged this on the pre-release versions, and this builds this sort of one big bundle that publishers are now promising to take as the full submission that you don't have to worry about. So I think this is a really nice, simple approach. Just putting it here so that you have this for reference. So I'm just sort of going pretty quick about it. So I told you I believe extensibility is at the heart of good tools. And so if you want to extend Quarto, what can you do about it? And once again, each one of these is like honestly a good sort of 2 to 3 hour talk. So I just want to tell you where the entry points are so you can start. So you can start by having someone else do the work for you, which is honestly a great start. You can use an existing extension, and we have a lot of them on our website. So if you just go here and you look at Quarto extensions, we have a list of them that will do a number of different things. So, we have something that will let you sort of add Mastodon, Blue Sky, X, Twitter, whatever it's called today. It will let you embed font awesome icons. It will let you use, for example, so there's a Molstar package that does protein visualization. So you can actually just embed those directly in your documents. We have things that will generate QR codes if you want them. It will generate so if it turns out that the thing you want to do is already there, just reuse the extension. That's nice. You can start at the very basics and sort of use CSS and SCSS. If you want to change the look of this, so if you want to sort of have different fonts, if you want to have the theme of your academic web page and you want to customize that, it's a very simple entry point. We have very good documentation. It works very well with all of our HTML formats like reveal and the web pages and so on. You can use this JavaScript variant called observable JavaScript from a different company that makes this open source product, which allows you to create interactive web pages. So you can compute a data frame in R, make that available for HTML, and then very quickly build interactive experiences with that. So this is quite nice. Can give you like a whole talk about it. I really do think this is a really nice feature of Quarto. It works well with both Python and R, and it allows you to do sort of interactive visualizations quite quickly. If you want to create a custom bibliography, or if you want to change the way the bullet points and lists are rendered and things of that sort, you can actually use Pandocs manipulation extensions, and you can use Lua. This is where maybe the slide should be orange, because I write Lua pretty much every day. It's a learning curve. So, but you can do it. The extension sort of like exists and the escape hatch is there because we believe that people should be able to access it. The same way that we have that embed shortcode, you can write custom shortcodes. If you have a function call to like put a video from a service, we happen to have that. But if you wanted to write your own, you could. If you have your own library that does something really nice in JavaScript for your problem domain, you can write a shortcode that sort of calls that and then makes that available for people so that it's very easy for someone authoring Markdown. So those all exist. If you're feeling very, very brave, you can actually write a full custom format. So if you have, like a new way to produce like an output that is none of what we have, we give you full computation access to the document so that you can write whatever you want from the syntax tree. This is a lot of work, but this will allow you to target any possible submission that you want to do it in any format. If somehow you need an XML that's for your own reasons, you can actually do that. So this is, again, a lot of work. It's not easy, but the escape hatch is there. We think it's important for people to have access to it. So takeaways. You can use Quarto today to write websites. Like, so Quarto is pretty recent. It has existed for about 1.5 years since version 1. But it's not a prototype. Like, people do use it in production. They use to create papers, they use to create websites, blogs, and books. The R4 Data Science book is now written in Python. The New Pandas book, or in Quarto. The New Pandas book from Wes McKinney was written in Quarto as well. So this is actually being used by sort of folks that publish large, complicated books. You can use both knitr and Jupyter. If you're in a group that uses both, I think this is the best solution that exists out there to have people talk from one world to another. It really isn't a prototype, like I said. Just to give you like one of the publicly available statistics, in Visual Studio Code tracks the extensions. We have about 55,000 people actively using our Quarto extension. So, there's a lot of people kicking the tires of this. And so if you're trying to use it, it probably other folks ran into bugs before you did. So I do think this is quite usable. And if you're going to use something like RStudio or VS Code to create documents, Quarto is already, I think, a big improvement over rmarkdown. So in particular, one of the things that I really like about it is I mentioned to you that YAML is terrible, and I agree that it's terrible. But one of the things that we do is there are literally 1,000 options for Pandoc that are all configurable through YAML that are hard to know whether you got the syntax right, what are the options. So it's very hard to navigate. One of the things that we spent like actual 6 months on was an infrastructure for validating all of those. So if you're in VS Code or RStudio, will tell you like, with a little squiggle, like you got this one wrong. And if you're editing interactively and you sort of tab into an option, you get all the possible things that you could put in there. And I think that's quite powerful because it lets you sort of say, oh, I want to use themes. So then just type theme, and then there'll be a drop-down list of all the built-in themes that you can choose from, and you don't have to remember where they are. So this is a really decent way of navigating the large API surface. but I promise you I was going to be honest. And Quarto is slow. If you've used Hugo, if you use sort of like other static site generators, you're completely correct at being annoyed at how long it takes to generate pages. We have a plan to solve this. We plan to land it in like early to mid 2024. But Quarto is quite slow. It takes on the order of a third of a second per page, which doesn't seem like a lot until you have a big website with 500 pages and suddenly you're looking at a few minutes just to re-render everything, and that's super annoying. So trust me, it hurts us too. We are working on it. It's just a little harder to like get everything across all of the different entry points to work nicely so that we can parallelize it. I love our documentation. It's, I think, best in class. And I also think it sucks. I think where it particularly is not great is different people have different contexts, and there's enough of them that we should be creating documentation that is tailored for like a particular class of users. We've started doing that. We have a good story for like references and guides, but it's a work in progress. It literally gets better every week. We're making like daily improvements on it, but this is not as good as where it should be. If you're an academic and you want to send something, like it's sparse. There's a lot of journals. We need your help. If you want to make it work, please send me an email and I'll help you. But things are pretty sparse right now. And our error handling is really not good. I don't know what else to say. It's better than other tools, but it's not fantastic. So yes, there's more of it. And the final thing here is that Quarto is still young and it's still moving pretty fast. So you're likely to sort of want to install the latest version, which is not necessarily easy to do for corporate or government users. There's no easy solution for that. And I just want to acknowledge that that's not great. So turns out it took longer than I thought. I was hoping to leave us 10 minutes at least, but it is now 5:02. So I want to thank you all for hearing. Thanks for all the questions on chat. Hopefully I got to everyone. Yes, we have questions. You can choose which questions are there. Are they these questions? Are they these questions? Or are they these questions? Mike is asking whether we have a few minutes. I do have, I have the next hour, but I want to be respectful of folks' time as well. So we can keep going until folks decide to leave. So let's open for questions. And if you have more time, please wait until other questions have been asked. And let's see what folks want to talk about. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, awesome. That was fantastic. I scanned your slides. I was like, yeah, no, there's no way that's a half hour, dude. Come on.
I used to be able to speak faster. I think I lost my edge.
That was good. No, thank you so much. And yeah, I'd open the floor to anybody who wants to ask Carlos some Q&As here.
Yeah. Mike mentioned my Mastodon earlier on. I'm happy to talk to people over there. I have my email as well here. Mike, where is this? Let me just actually post it here. So if folks want to like reach out and they're there, this is great. I have my email here. It's my first name and my last name. Should be pretty easy to find too. I guess I should also tell you that if you want to use Quarto, quarto.org is the link. You can download it there. You don't need RStudio or VS Code. You can just download the standalone version. So, questions?
And Carlos is serious, just reach out. He came recommended by a colleague of mine, Rich McDonald, who I think showed up in the issues in Quarto and found you very, very helpful. So some kudos for community support.
Thank you. We do work very hard. We actually have folks that we pay to do that. And it's our little job. Like, we developed this in there, but like it's part of our job to actually be on the issues and responding. So I did come back from a week of vacation and I haven't been there in a few days. So I apologize if today is the worst day for me to tell you that I'm responsive because it's been a few days. But once I'm done with this talk, I'll be there. So yes, please reach out. We want to hear the things you don't like about it more. I would love to hear the things that work well, but I want to also hear the things like, I wish we could use it, but And I can't promise you to fix it, but we promise you we take that very seriously.
If nobody else wants to pipe up, I have a burning question about environments.
Go for it.
I am infinitely frustrated and flouted by setting up environments that I can reliably run other people's code in across my teams. And I have this dream, yeah, right? It's
I don't
not
know if
just,
you've seen
and
this.
it's especially when I'd really like to have both a solid Python environment and a solid R environment that, say, has GDAL and maybe a few other system dependencies, netcdf, etc. And I guess my question is, like, is there a world where Quarto nicely hooks up to a semi-standard container rather than running in your system and facilitates that environment kind of packaging encapsulation?
I'm not the best person to answer this, unfortunately. I can add, so I will make a note and follow up with you. I can tell you the kinds of things that that a company is working on, that sort of like Posit is trying to build, and the kinds of sort of things that we do from the Quarto side. So on either knitr or Jupyter, Quarto will search in the current directory for the existence of something like a virtual environment to try to sort of like run it. Specifically, we do that through rnv, which is an R package that will like find and like load virtual environments. And so we will attempt to do that. We also, like, if you have a Python virtual environment active on the shell, Quarto will respect that. Right, so we will just run under that environment, and we try very hard for Quarto's requirements to be very low so that you can run this on most Python environments that you can choose to do so. With all that said, I know that, like, if you're trying to run both R and Python through the exact same library dependencies, things get pretty hard. And one of the things that I know there's community support for is a Conda environment, so you can actually use. So we're on Conda Forge as of a few months ago, which is, I think, if you've used Conda before, again, I have to be careful as they're competitors now. So Conda is fantastic if you're willing to buy wholesale into like everything, right? Like you give up like your binaries being anywhere else, everything is just entirely inside the Conda ecosystem. And they have R libraries, they have dependencies, they have Python, they have all of that stuff. So if you're willing to like say, okay, we are going to go into Conda and everything works inside there, then I do think you can probably make exactly what you want, which is R would then find the appropriate Conda libraries. Python would find the appropriate Conda libraries, and things will work. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I do know that folks use it, and like we're keeping that stuff maintained. So it's out there. But you're sort of mentioning like the next step of the harder problem, which is not only those two worlds need to exist, but they need to like be the same world, right? And I don't think there's a great solution out there. And just yesterday on my social media, I ran across someone that said there's a packaging conference that will happen soon. I can't remember. Let's see, packaging con. I think it was called Yes. So in Berlin somewhere, like October. So this is sort of like, how do you like actually figure out all of this stuff? So I think that problem is still very much open. I think we're in a world where you mentioned containers, right? So, you can create a Docker image. We have Quarto Docker images, but Docker images are very isolated from one another on purpose. That's great. But if you want to make sure that you're running all libraries in the same, then now you're thinking about making the mother of all Docker images, which is just a gigantic hard drive somewhere, right? Like it's literally our machines with all of the problems. So yeah, I think that for that we should really be here, right? Like this is not great. I don't have a great answer. So
Yeah, that's a good summary. Thank you. And you got some. I think you got some easier to answer questions in the chat. Sorry.
Any plans for a Sphinx plugin for creating software documentation? Thank you for asking that. We don't have plans for a Sphinx plugin, but we do have this, which is in very active development. But I can tell you it is really sweet. So this is called Quarto Doc, and I can tell you this guy cares very deeply about Chow cares very deeply about making this great. And a lot of the documentation for the Python libraries that Posit develops are now already using Quarto Doc. So this is targeted directly to Python users. And in fact, Mike is actually a Python user and not an R user. So a lot of the stuff is there. And so I take a look. It is full feature and stable, but it is under active development. So, but it's nice. I like it. Thank you. That was an excellent question. And I think Quarto is nice. Other questions? Mid-attempt Python R Quarto container. Oh, Ian, it's good to see you. Ian is very helpful, very active user on our forums as well. So yes, so this is available for folks there. They want to use it. I'll take a look at that. That looks great, actually. So let me just plug Ian's. Yeah, so this is for people who want to do work in CI. So this is actually another, I didn't want to get too much into it, but when folks talk about runners, one of the really sort of, I think, attractive ways of solving the problem of having to install the latest version of Quarto that I was talking about is to learn how to use continuous integration, which is this idea that every time you push something into your GitHub repository, there's an action that runs, and this action can be run a Quarto render on it. So you're not rendering on your computer, you're rendering on someone else's computer in the cloud, and it downloads and installs the latest version of Quarto every time. And so this is a really nice way to get to use the latest version of Quarto if you don't have permissions to run it. All you need is a web browser, and things should work. It's a bit of a learning curve, but we have sort of guides to help you in CI as well. And so this is something to consider. So Carl asks, would love to learn more about HTML extensions. You linked to the 25 supported bootswatch extensions, but looks like there's some middleware needed there. Any valid bootswatch theme isn't automatically a Quarto theme. If it is compatible with Bootstrap, it will work in Quarto. So we do use we have a system in which we get our variables and we sort of harmonize them with like Bootstrap's SCSS, and we emit like an SCSS that works for both. So if you replace the Bootstrap theme, like the Bootswatch theme, with another Bootswatch theme, we'll serve from there, and things should actually work. So the Bootswatch extensions are just the ones that come by default. But if you write a new one and you give us that specific SAS file, a CSS file, things should work. I don't know if we have if we have something in our test suite to check for that. It's kind of an obnoxious thing to test for, like to figure out whether CSS was picked up, but it's designed to work. So if you try to do that and things break, it's a bug. Please report it. We'll try to fix it. Charles Teague is the developer who's a really like a CSS expert, and he is he wants this to work, and he's pretty good at it, so he'll respond pretty quickly. It's a great question. Thank you. There are other questions? All right. I think we're good to call it then.
Yeah, this is really good. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Carlos.
so much. No, this was great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And like I said, please reach out. We're happy to help anywhere we can. So,
well, I captured reasonable chunk of notes, and those will get put up on a wiki with the recording linked, as long as you're cool with YouTube recording and wiki posts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Okay.
I managed to keep it PG-13, so we're
Oh,
good.
that's fantastic. Thank you.
Uh,
And yeah,
Thank you so much, folks.
next
It's super
month.
fun.
So next month, I've invited a colleague of mine from the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy Center for Geospatial Solutions, who's working on a project called GeoConnects with me and many others in the water community. It's all about linking real world environmental features to digital representations of them and leveraging web mass market web search to really get into the nitty gritty of data integration. So a little bit of a different speed, but something that we in the IT&I series historically have talked about a lot, and excited about it. So unless there are any other final words, I see Michael, you came on video. You have a question or comment here? No? Okay, we're good. All right, good to see your face. I'll sign off. Have a great afternoon, everybody, or morning or night or wherever you are. So awesome to see everybody on. Thanks for coming, and take care.
Take care, folks. Thank you.
Cool. See ya.
Thank you so much, Carlos. That was great.